that some quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what is the pending amendment?
The Johnson Amendment.
Mr. President, I ask that the amendment number 556 be modified with the modifications at the desk.
The amendment is so modified.
I ask unanimous consent that Senator McCaskill be added as a co-sponsor to the amendment.
Without objection.
I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Joel Garrison of Senator Wyden's staff be granted 4 privileges during the consideration of H.R. 2055.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I suggest an absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. decorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it is my distinct honor to rise in support of Paul Etkin's confirmation to the bench of the Southern District of New York. We have a very deep pool of legal talent in New York, but Paul's nomination is one that everybody is talking about. Paul is brilliant, well-rounded, unwavering in his dedication to public service and his commitment to rule of law. His confirmation will only improve the workings of one of the best and busiest courts in the country. I look for three qualities in judicial candidates: excellence, moderation, diversity. Paul's excellence is provable on paper. He's a graduate of the University of Iowa and Yale Law School and has worked in the highest echelons of two of the three branches of government, including for the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice and for Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun. He has also climbed the ranks of private legal practice, serving most recently as the head of litigation for a large New York media company, Cablevision, one of our fine companies in New York. I consider a broad range of experiences to be an important training ground for teaching judicial candidates the second quality I look for: moderation. I do not like judges who tend to be too far to the right, but I do not like judges who come from a perspective that is too far left either. Paul Etkin fits the bill of a mainstream moderate judge. His moderation and modesty were evident during his confirmation hearing and are clear to all who know him. When judges have in their resume practical experience dealing with real-world problems, they tend to understand that a judge cannot simply impose things from on high without understanding the effect of imposing those decrees on average people, average businesses, average governments. When a candidate has these two qualities, excellence and moderation, diversity is a bonus. But in this case, at this moment, Paul is not just an excellent candidate. As the first openly gay man to be confirmed as a federal judge and to serve on the federal bench, he will be a symbol of how much we have achieved as a country in just the last few decades. And importantly, he will give hope to many talented young lawyers who until now thought their paths might be limited because of their sexual orientation. When Paul becomes Judge Etkin, he will be living proof to all those young lawyers that it really does get better, Mr. President. Paul Etkin's modest but brave act of going through the confirmation process makes this otherwise quiet moment historic. But long after today, what the history books will note about Paul are his achievements as a fair and brilliant judge. Mr. President, in a short while, our country will take one step closer towards equality and away from bigotry and prejudice. I am very proud to have played a supporting role in this, and I look forward to Paul Etkin's service on the bench in the Southern District of New York. Often quoted, but still one of my favorites, is what Martin Luther King often said. He said, "The arc of history is long, but it bends in the direction of justice." Paul Etkin's nomination to the federal bench proves that point once again. I yield the floor and ask for the commencement of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection. Excuse me. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider a nomination, which the clerk will now report.
Nomination, the judiciary, J. Paul Etkin of New York to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York.
Mr. President,
Senator from Iowa.
today the Senate will vote on the nomination of J. Paul Etkin to be United States District Judge for Southern District, New York. Today's vote marks the 28th judicial confirmation this year, and I'm pleased that we're moving forward with filling another vacancy. When I became ranking member of the Judiciary Committee earlier this year, the court had 103 vacancies. I have worked with the chairman and other members of the committee to reduce vacancies by confirming consensus nominees. We have brought the vacancies down now to 89. Based upon media stories and other exaggerated statements that I hear from time to time, you would think that the Republicans are blocking every judicial nominee. The records show something quite and very different. In total, 60% of the President's judicial nominees have been confirmed. 33% of the nominees have been confirmed during this Congress. We continue to achieve great progress in committee. 73% of the judicial nominees submitted this Congress have been afforded hearings. Only 57% of President Bush's nominees had hearings for the comparable time period during his presidency. We have reported 58% of the judicial nominees compared to only 54% of President Bush's nominees. In total, the committee has taken positive action on 62 of the 86 nominees submitted to the Congress, or 72% of those nominees submitted. I could go on with other statistics which demonstrate our cooperation and positive action, but I think I've made my point. We're moving forward on a consensus nominees. Complaints to the contrary are not supported by the facts. I'd like to say a few words about the nominee that we're considering today, a nominee that I will vote for. Mr. Etkin grew up in my state of Iowa and attended the University of Iowa, where he received his Bachelor of Arts degree with distinction in 1988. Following graduation from Yale Law School in 1991, the nominee spent 3 years clerking. He first clerked for 7th Circuit, then the D.C. Circuit, and finally for Justice Harry A. Blackmun of the Supreme Court of the United States. After his clerkships, Mr. Etkin entered private practice. In 1997, he became an attorney advisor with the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel. In 1999, the nominee joined the White House counsel's office as associate counsel to then-President Clinton. In 2001, he moved to New York, returned to private practice. In 2004, the nominee joined the legal department of Cablevision Systems Corporation. Currently, he is a senior vice president and associate general counsel at Cablevision. The ABA Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary has given Mr. Etkin a unanimous qualified rating. I support this nomination and congratulate him on his professional accomplishments. I yield the floor. And I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
consent the call of quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what is the parliamentary situation?
The Senate is considering the nomination of Paul Etkin of New York.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me speak for a moment on that. With today's vote on the nomination of Paul Etkin to fill a judicial vacancy in the Southern District of New York, the Senate's also going to mark a new and important milestone. Mr. Etkin, of course, is a superbly qualified nominee. He's also the first openly gay man to be nominated to be a federal district judge. And I fully expect him to be confirmed to a lifetime appointment of the federal bench. And I'm proud of, first, the President for taking this critical step to break down another barrier, increase diversity in the federal judiciary, but also proud of Paul Etkin to step forward to serve. He was reported with the support of every member of the Judiciary Committee, Democratic and Republican. And I commend my fellow Republicans and Democrats for that vote. I think he's going to be confirmed by what I believe will be an overwhelming vote in the Senate. It's a sign that as a nation we've taken a new and welcome step in the path of ensuring that federal judiciary better reflects all Americans. And I'd ask my whole statement in support of Mr. Etkin's nomination be placed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm going to speak on another matter, but first I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Vermont.
I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I understand this vote is scheduled for 5:30. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. President, I ask consent that not to delay in any way the vote, still the vote at 5:30, but that I be allowed to continue during the time remaining to me as though in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, back on May 12th, we're now in July, but back on May 12th, the President requested that Congress pass legislation to enable Robert Mueller to continue serving as the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for up to 2 additional years. In light of the leadership transition at other key national security agencies, the Secretary of Defense was leaving, there's change in the directorship of the CIA and so forth, and of course the unique circumstances in which we find ourselves as the 10th anniversary of 9/11 approaches in less than 2 months. And in response to the President's request, a bipartisan group of senators drafted and introduced S-1103, a bill that would create a one-time exception to the statute which, as the distinguished presiding officer knows, limits the term of the FBI director to 10 years, but this would allow the term of the incumbent FBI director to continue for 2 additional years. Given the continuing threats to our nation and the need to provide continuity and stability on the President's national security team, it's important that this critical legislation be enacted without delay. I mention this, Mr. President, because the time for responsible congressional action is all but elapsed. We're really in the almost final hour. On May 26, the bipartisan legislation to provide the one-time statutory exception, drafted by Senator Grassley, was introduced. It was co-sponsored with me, so both Senator Grassley and I were sponsors, as well as the chair and vice chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Senators Feinstein and Chambliss. And in the Judiciary Committee, we moved quickly to consider this legislation, report it to the full Senate. We've been seeking an agreement to consider the bill for more than a month. Every Democratic senator has agreed to move forward, but there have been objections on the Republican side of the aisle on this critical piece of legislation. Now, I would note that the bill enjoys the strong support of law enforcement groups, including the National Association of Police Organizations, the National Fraternal Order of Police, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Police Executive Research Forum, Major County Sheriff's Association, the National Native American Law Enforcement Association, and the FBI National Academy Associates. They've all supported it, and that's why every Senate Democrat has been prepared to take up and pass this extension bill for weeks. And there's no good reason for delay. First, as was reportedly, Senator Coburn is holding up consideration of the bill, but then Senator DeMint, now apparently an objection by Senator Paul of Kentucky. I find it hard to understand why we would hold up a piece of legislation like this, and frankly, I would state, and I'd be happy to hear from the other side, but I'd state that the sort of delay is inexplicable and it's inexcusable. I've even been willing to proceed along the lines of an alternative approach that was requested by Senator Coburn. It's an approach I think is based on a constitutional problem that does not exist, but because of the threats facing the United States, I was willing to go along with that. After all, as set forth in the committee report in the extension bill and as reaffirmed in the June 20, 2011 memorandum of opinion by the Office of Legal Counsel, the bill reported by a bipartisan majority of the Senate Judiciary Committee of the Senate is constitutionally sound, and it is a proper response by Congress to the President's request. But notwithstanding the fact that all our legal authorities have said that it was unnecessary to add to it, I was prepared to proceed using Senator Coburn's language instead of Senator Grassley's or mine, so long as one further problem is removed. The further problem, of course, was that under Senator Coburn's approach, as I pointed out at our hearing, at our markup, it would necessitate the renomination of Director Mueller and then his reconsideration and reconfirmation by the Senate after enactment by both the Senate and the House of this alternative bill and signature by the President. Oh, and incidentally, all of that before August 3rd. On June 29th, I warned this was an additional, unnecessary, and possibly dangerous complication. I didn't want Americans to approach the 10th anniversary of 9/11 without an FBI director in office. I pointed this out, the markup in our Senate Judiciary Committee. I was assured by the Senator from Oklahoma that he would get unanimous consent to do all of the short time agreements to get the bill passed, get his amendment passed, get it through the Senate, through the House, and back and get the nomination with a, I think he suggested, 2-hour time agreement. If we did all that, it wouldn't be the best of solutions, but it'd be better than what we have now. Now we have the distractions to Director Mueller that have been created by these extended proceedings that have been damaging enough. Then it requires renomination. And then allow it to be held hostage or used as leverage, as so many of President Obama's nominations have been. Seems to me a risk is better avoided. I did not want the extension of Director Mueller's service leading the FBI to follow the same objections that have obstructed Senate action on other important presidential nominations and appointments. But unfortunately, as I warned at our markup, this is precisely what's happened in this case. Now, I've spoken about the unnecessary and inexcusable delays on judicial nominations, even consensus nominees, even those supported by the Republican senators of the states, have faced long delays before Senate Republicans would allow a vote. And we've seen so many of President Obama's executive nominations subject to the same unfair treatment. Just recently, we finally broke through months of obstruction of the Deputy Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General for National Security, key national security-related nominations. And I warned on June 29th that we have no guarantee the President's nomination of FBI Director be treated any differently. I wish I'd been wrong, but unfortunately, the same kind of delays and obstructions for the sake of delays and obstructions have occurred. And while this bill was reported over 1 month ago, action has been stymied by Republican objections ever since. So I said, every Democrat is prepared to send it up, take it up, send it to the House of Representatives, get it acted on before August 3rd. That's what we should be doing. It will fulfill the President's request that Congress create a one-time exception to the statutory 10-year term of the FBI Director. Especially when virtually everybody I've heard from in the Senate says a good person to lead it at a critical time. Now is not a time, 2 months before the anniversary of 9/11, to have somebody new on the job. So I hope we'll take it up soon. I wish we'd done it at the time I urged senators do. I wish senators who had said let's delay because we could easily get a unanimous consent agreement. I wish they had been right. I wish I'd been wrong when I said I didn't see that happening. I do applaud the Democratic side of the aisle for saying that there would be no objections on our side to move forward to this legislation and so we could extend for 2 years the term of Robert Mueller. And incidentally, I congratulate Director Mueller and his wife for being willing to put on hold their plans for retirement for those 2 years for the good of the country. But that's the situation we are. I hope cooler heads will prevail. I don't like this tampering with the security of the country. So, Mr. President, I suggest we go back into executive session, and I'd ask, the ayes and nays been